Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Abbey Research Reads. I am Dr. Kristen Donnelly, and I have a small confession to make, and that is that I am obsessed with studying cults. And I, as a religion scholar, am absolutely fascinated by how people construct systems of meaning with something that they view as bigger or better than them or more powerful. As a human, I am just fascinated by groups. As a woman, I'm particularly interested in the ones that specifically prey on women and how they treat with women. It's a thing. I've been fascinated forever. And the one that has captured my attention the strongest, the most recently, is NXIVM. I've talked about it on Fridays before. You may have caught up with it, but the reason I'm talking to you about it today is that the book that is releasing this week, which is called Don't Call It a Cult by Sarah Berman, is, for my money, the best kind of written account and holistic account of what happened in this thing called NXIVM, that you may have heard about as the sex cult Allison Mack was in from Smallville. And it's kind of one of those very sensationalized things that has made its way through the culture over the last couple of years. But rewind really briefly. For anyone that isn't aware, NXIVM was, essentially a multi-level marketing company founded and kind of run and everything by a gentleman named Keith Raniere, who is currently serving 120 years in prison for a whole host of crimes. And for most of the people in this cult, like everybody else, it's probably not even a cult. This is the thing with cults. Sometimes the outer edges of it aren't cultish. It depends on how far out you get. Anyway, at its core, what drew people to it was a promise that Keith Raniere was the smartest man in the world. He claimed to have a 240 IQ, which is impossible. And that he had come up with this new way of thinking about the world called rational inquiry. He trademarked it and patented it and everything. And essentially what it is that your emotions have no control over you. And any emotion you have, you can investigate and unpack. And then once you do those things and you disconnect the event from the emotion, you'll become a fully integrated person. If this smacks of Scientology to you, it's because he took a lot of his ideas from some of the early works of L. Ron Hubbard, even though Raniere denies this, but it's pretty clear. And some of his associates at the time are like, no, he read Dianetics. So anyway, they ran courses all over the world. This was incredibly popular. It made money. It might still be making money. They're still faithful up to this. It made a ton of money for the people that were at the top. Much like every successful multi-level marketing, you had to reach a certain point before you actually made any cash. And then the gap between who made some cash and who made all the cash was pretty big. Where it starts to get a little bit more culty is that the whole thing was built around Keith. So if you went to a class and maybe got quite a lot out of this integration exercise, and I can go on. And if you guys are interested in my socio-religious analysis of NXIVM and why it was so popular, I'm happy to do that. But you could kind of, I guess, just walk away at that point and take from it what you wanted. And it was great. And everything was really, really helpful. But as you kept going, everything became about Keith. He called himself the Vanguard. You had to refer to him as such. There was a week every year to celebrate his birthday where they all went to Lake George and celebrated Keith. And it just kept getting, as you got farther and farther in, as you were in longer and longer, he became more and more the center of your entire existence. Now, the reason he's in jail is specifically for a group that he started called DOS, which is referred to, and it stands for Dominus Obsequious Sororitas, which is a made-up Latin phrase for essentially master over slave. And he started a secret slave society in which women actually were branded with his initials. And by branded, I mean like we brand cattle with his initials. And this all kind of came crumbling down in a combination of factors, including the very, very public advocacy of Dynasty star Catherine Oxenberg, whose daughter was caught up in this, and a almost front page story in the New York Times by a defector named Sarah Edmondson, who stood on the cover, who stood in the New York Times and pulled down the label, the very bit of her jeans to show that right at her pelvis she had another man's initials, which her husband did not love. The book goes into all of this. There's been 2 recent television docuseries that I would recommend that do it as well. HBO's The Vow and Starz' Seduced, and I'll put both of them in the show notes. I liked both for very different reasons, and everything was great. Getting to the book tells you all of this. The book lays it all out. It starts with his trial, which is a great place to start, and then kind of goes back into it and lays out the whole history of NXIVM. There are 2 other books that when you search NXIVM, you get. One is by one of his ex-girlfriends, and one is by Sarah Edmondson, and they're both very, very helpful to get an insider's perspective. What Sarah Berman as a journalist has done, she was working for Vice and covering this for them for a long time, is kind of take all of the pieces and weave them together. There's some pieces I definitely wish she would have pushed a little bit harder on. There's some I think she spent a little bit too much time on, but that's niggly things with the book. I think if you are somebody who has heard this like kind of flying around the ether and doesn't know where to start and isn't super into either 8-part podcasts or 5-part television shows, because the real first people to kind of blow this open was the Canadian Broadcasting Company's documentary podcast called Uncover that they did on NXIVM, and we'll link to that as well. And you just like books, this is a great one. I read it this weekend, and I've spent the weekend DMing everybody I know who's been like, man, I really need to learn more about NXIVM. Well, great. Here's 300 really well written and really well researched pages in order to let you do just that. Before I sign off, though, I'd like to say really, really quickly that we stand on the side of survivors. Sarah Edmondson is a controversial figure in this because she was the biggest recruiter and brought a lot of people in, and she atones for that in a lot of ways. And Sarah is somebody that I'd very much like to have a meal with and unpack a little bit of this with. But I'll say that it's very easy to get caught up in the idea that you're going to change the world. I did it. I spent most of my teenagehood believing that the group of people that I was with, which was just, and still called evangelical Christianity, was the way to change the world. I would never, ever call myself brainwashed. I would never say I was in a cult. I was never any of those things, none of those things. But there are activities that I participated in and beliefs that I look back on and go, oh my gosh, I don't even know where those came from. But I was so caught up in this deep need to change the world. I have a lot of empathy for people that get caught up in these movements, and absolutely no empathy, to be completely honest, for the leaders of them that build cults of personality and manipulate the followers around them for power. And in Keith Raniere's case, an absolutely shocking amount of sexual partners. Shocking. That he combined with body shaming and forcing women into eating disorders and forcing them to terminate pregnancies they didn't want to terminate. He's a monster, and I'm comfortable using that word, and I'm very grateful that he's behind bars. I very much put him in the same category as Larry Nassar, who we've talked about a lot on this channel, as another person that should be removed from public life forever because they cannot be trusted. The second season of one of the shows is coming out soon and promises that it's going to be a lot more from Keith's perspective, and like Keith speaks out and things like that. And I can't wait to see how he tries to convince us that everything he did was fine. It's going to be something else. In the meantime, I can't recommend highly enough that you read Sarah Berman's book. Again, it's out this week, and it's called Don't Call It a Cult, about the juggernaut of trauma that was NXIVM. That's all for this edition of Abbey Research Reads. I'm Dr. Kristen, and I'll see you next time. Bye.